Welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about ideas of culture. I think as a society we have a very narrow definition of what culture is, so we're going to go ahead and start off by defining that. Culture is shared behaviors, beliefs, attitudes, values, material objects. It's important to note that culture is learned, it's transmitted from generation to generation, it's shared among groups, and it's adaptive, it's always changing. That's a really important part. So we need to differentiate material culture versus non-material culture. Material culture is like physical objects, buildings, furniture, weapons, etc. Non-material would be like inside us. So that would be like our beliefs, our customs, our rules of behavior. Also, our symbols. Symbols can be smiles, frowns, gestures. When I was in India, I had like an embarrassing moment. I was getting on a bus and I thought it was going where I needed to go. So I asked the guy hanging off the bus and he just kept doing this to me. So I went away, obviously. But I didn't realize, culturally speaking, in India, that actually means come here. He was basically telling me I was right and get on the bus by doing this. So it's important to look at our gestures as well as part of our culture. Flags are a part of our culture. I have a U.S. flag right in here, as many people do. I think a very high percentage of Americans say they have a U.S. flag somewhere in or on their house. And that means different things to different people. But even across the world, when it comes to flags, a third of flags in the world have religious symbols on them, so that means something to them. We also have to look at language. So the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis states it provides us with the framework for interpreting social reality and the world around us, that's what language is for. So it says that we're very limited by our language. We only understand culture as far as we can verbalize it. So that's the point of language, is learning to grow in culture. And we can do that cross-culturally, or we can do that interculturally within our schools, within our communities, different places like that. Now, it's also important to note that language is important, especially in terms of, like, we can use it from a conflict theorist perspective and look at feminism. What would you think if I said, hey girls, welcome back this week, and we're going to talk about culture, as opposed to, hey guys, good to have you back, we're going to talk about culture. There's really common language that some can see as exclusionary, so it's important to take note of that. Also pertaining to race and ethnicity, we have things in our language with a negative connotation. So like maybe the word blackball, maybe the words black market, blackmail. And I'm not going to ask you to define them, but I only ask you, what is a white knight? What is a white lie? What is white noise? I think you're going to find that some of our language is used to have negative connotations over some and positive connotations over the other. So language is very important, especially when communicating our values. And we have a lot of different values in the U.S. I'm going to name what I think is a big part of our values in our culture: personal achievement, activity and lots of work, humanitarianism, technological innovation, new and improved things, constant progress. Material possessions can tend to own us and be a big deal. Conformity to groups, because nobody wants to stick out and be strange. Democracy, as well as individualism. Within our groups here, I'm going to go ahead and speak on norms, folkways, mores, taboos. I think it's important to understand these as well. So norms can be defined as our correct and incorrect behavior within groups. We have a lot of norms in society. Just our everyday activities tend to be norms. So to take it a step further, folkways are our everyday customs. For example, we cover our mouth or our nose when we sneeze or cough. We knock before we enter a room often. These are what are known as folkways. Mores are a little bit more serious norms. So we're looking at faithfulness to your partner, or telling lies, or doing illegal drugs. These are things that can make people a little more judgmental, and we tend to call these mores. To take that a step further, we have taboos. These are things that aren't tolerable in our culture or in most cultures. So we could look at things like cannibalism. We could look at things like incest. These things are very off limits to most cultures. And some of them even have laws defined around them. And laws are basically just formally defined norms. And you have sanctions for violating these things and for conforming to these things. Sanctions are rewards for good behavior, but it's also penalties for bad behavior. So we can all think of situations of like going to jail or paying a fine being a sanction, but also a good sanction would be like belonging to a group. Having more belonging to a group would be an example of a good sanction. So speaking of groups, our groups also have rituals. These are repeated behaviors that unite people. We share Christmas gifts at Christmas time, maybe Thanksgiving dinner. As I mentioned earlier with the flag, we have the national anthem. These are things that unite people. The national anthem actually came about in Major League Baseball to try to help recruit people for the military in the earlier part of last century. And now we know it as just a regular custom, a regular ritual that we do. So now that we've discussed all these things, we have to discuss a very important word. And I think this word can stay close to you for the rest of the semester because I think it's important to try to recognize. And that word is ethnocentrism. This is the belief that one person's own culture, society, or group is better than others. And I think we all tend to hold these bias. We all tend to have this tendency when we're looking at a culture outside of our own. And I think it's something that we could do a lot better at, trying to understand and wrap our mind around in order to achieve something that looks more like cultural relativism. Cultural relativism states that no culture is better and that it should be judged by its own standards, not by our standards. I think this is a really great thing to strive for, especially as I've traveled to other countries and other cities around the States. Multiculturalism, pluralism, these are things of coexisting. Coexisting, that's what this is right here, by the way. So a lot of people ask me about that. Coexisting without any dominant culture, any appearance of a dominant culture is what pluralism is. And I'm going to get into something just very slightly. I'm going to touch on it, but there's a rant coming later. I think I'm going to start inserting these video rants about certain things. And this is pop culture versus high culture. High culture being things like opera, ballet, theater, classical music performances, versus pop culture being like what you and I see in our daily lives, our TV shows, our music, things like that. There's big differences between these things, and a lot of this has to do with cultural capital. Cultural capital is a good thing I think we should strive for. We should strive to understand for other cultures and gain as much capital as we can. I think it gives us advantages socially, much like social capital does. The more people we know, the more people we understand, the better off we're going to be when it comes to buying a house, looking for a job, any number of things that we want to do to achieve social mobility. Now, one of the last things that's important to understand is that there's always cultural lag. That is, there's a gap between material and non-material culture. I think the best example I can come up with right now off the bat is texting and driving. This is something that people do culturally. And some states are starting to design laws and implement public policy that is against texting and driving. But much of the United States has not caught up with that. So we have what's called a cultural lag here. Now, quickly, I'm just going to mention some theorist viewpoints. As a functionalist would say culture binds people together, but others would say that this view overlooks diversity. Conflict theorists would say the rich and the powerful, the bourgeoisie, is in control of culture. But this tends to overlook the benefits of diversity as well. Symbolic interactionism, that was our micro theory. This looks at individuals and our own personal construction of our reality and our culture within that reality. So it's like what culture means to me, what I value about culture. But it doesn't offer any systematic framework. So that can be that can be something that's a criticism of symbolic interactionism. And as we keep going and I discuss these theories, I'm going to let you decide what you fall under when it comes to a theorist. But overall, we're going to keep looking at all these different perspectives. That way we can get a better understanding and be able to critically think about these topics, such as culture. Have a good one.